I start off whenever I'm planning any lesson in social studies or any subject area. I use the Georgia Standards of Excellence. That's my go-to, and I try to stick with the content, the cognitive demand, and the context of the standard before I go forth with any lesson design. But I choose the lesson design of inquiry, especially in social studies, because social studies should be a quest for answers and investigating the things that happen in our past. So I designed my lesson with the big question in mind. This lesson's compelling question was the Battle of Fort Sumter the start of the Civil War? And everything we do today is going to be aimed at answering that question. Now, what typically should happen is they should come up with other questions as they're going through this inquiry process. But everything is going to be focused on that question in particular. I started inquiry with the group that I have right now by training them to be noticers, noticing things and noticing things around them, but also images that they're familiar with, but interpreting those images based on the evidence that you see, not just what you think you see, putting all of that together, and then and just looking at the details more closely. So we did that at the very beginning of the school year to get them into the feeling of, I'm really looking for information, and how do I get it? You have to look at the details in order to get that information. So we've been doing that a lot this year. Then we started getting into more, okay, so what kind of questions can we generate to give us more information about, and that it actually was a natural progression into, they began asking questions, and I didn't hold them back from what kinds of questions they could ask. Then we started narrowing in on the specific kinds of questions we would ask with the specific topic that we're talking about, because some questions are better for certain topics than others. Because we're doing inquiry work, they have to understand that just with any work you do, you have specific tools to do that work. So we reviewed the tools that we use as historians who are investigating the past. So we reviewed all the different kinds of tools historians use, newspaper clippings, maps, and quotes, and public documents, and things of that nature, and other primary sources. And we talked about how there are certain questions that you would ask of a map that you wouldn't necessarily ask of a public document, like a written document. So we did that work as well. The previous lesson before the lesson that we're doing, it was all about, so what kinds of questions would you ask a map? What kinds of questions, general questions, would you ask of written documents? What kinds of questions would you ask of newspaper clippings? And so they generated a list of questions that are general for those types of resources, and that will lead into what we do today. The context of this lesson is it's right before the Civil War. We've already talked about the abolitionist movement and the greatest issue of the 1800s is slavery. And is it wrong to enslave another person, or is it wrong to tell somebody that they cannot have a slave? So those are the issues at hand, and that was never dealt with. And we have talked a little bit about how that issue kept getting swept under the rug, and it never got dealt with properly or honestly. And you can only contain that much anxiety and fear for so long before it explodes. And that's what we're going into today, is how you can contain it so long before it reaches its melting point. My students are very keen on investigating, and any kind of learning that they do is, if they're considering, we're looking at the story behind it. So that's when they become historians. It's when they're trying to figure out the why something happened, or the effect of something happening. So they put on their historian's hat because they want to think about the connections between one event and another. And they know there are specific questions that you would ask that go with that. As a geographer, they understand that when they're looking at a place and the culture of that place, and not just the culture, but the location of this place and all the things that have to do with the landforms and the water that's nearby, how everything is tied together, and it really influences how a people develop. So my kids understand that that's a separate way of thinking. And the same thing with political science, how the laws that we make, how it impacts everything we do, but how they can pull it apart and how they can analyze it and then put it back together. They can synthesize it by not just seeing how it occurs in the topic within the history domain, but also pull it out and say, well, how is it relevant today to me as a citizen? Boys and girls, today we are going to continue our learning that we've been doing about the Civil War. Now, remember, anything we're learning about in history, we know that as historians we use specific tools. And I'm going to refer you to, we've been talking about tools that historians use, and not just historians, but also economists and geographers and political science. But today you are historians. That means you're investigating something that happened in history. So remember, your tools are primary sources mostly, and like quotes and journal entries and speeches and poems and newspaper magazine articles. And we've already been thinking about the kind of, we've been aiming toward the lesson we're doing today, and we've already been thinking about the kinds of questions you would ask using those specific types of tools. So if you look in your notebook, you'll see the list that you generated of the kinds of questions you would ask of specific types of tools. So, Kerrigan, can you share out really loudly one of the kinds of questions that you would ask of maps?
Where is the place in the event?
Where is the place in the event? So if you're talking about a historical event, you want to know where is it, and you would ask that of a map. What is a question that you would use with an image? Now, an image, a map is a specific type of image, but any general image, what is a type of question you would use, Caitlin?
What did the things look like at this exact time?
What did things look like at this exact time, that moment of the event? That's good. What was the question you would ask of a newspaper clipping or headline?
Why was this event important?
Why was it important? Why are we even studying it? This happened 150 years ago. Why are we studying it today? You would look at a newspaper clipping, and can anybody remind us what makes a newspaper clipping different than just a regular document? Yes?
It's what they know at that moment and that time.
It's what happened at that time, and it's what they knew at that time. Did they know what was going to happen in the fuure? When they wrote it, they didn't. So it gives us a different, what's that word we've been using? Perspective. It gives them a different perspective than than we do looking back at it 150 years later. And then we have one last one. We have written documents, and it could be any type of written document. Laura Francis.
What was the information supposed to be public?
Was the information supposed to be public? Now, if it's written down and we're looking at it 150 years later, was it meant to be seen now? Was it meant to be seen by the public? That's a good question. So all of the questions that you came up with are very, very general to those types of tools that historians use. Now, what we're going to do today in our inquiry is we're going to think specifically about one specific type of question, one specific question. And this is going to be our compelling question. But here's how I'm going to lead up to it. You ready? This is so good. I read this morning. I'm reading the book Because of Winn-Dixie. And raise your hand if you've read Because of Winn-Dixie. Okay. So you're familiar with this story. So check this out. So this is in chapter 16, and it starts off with Franny Block, who is the librarian, is talking to India Opal, and she's telling India Opal the story about her great-grandfather. It says, Litmus W. Block was just a boy when the firing on Fort Sumter occurred. Miss Franny Block said as she started in on her story. Fort Sumter, I said? It was the firing on Fort Sumter that started the war, said Amanda. Okay, I said. I shrugged. So The question I have, because Amanda in this story is saying it was the firing on Fort Sumter, the battle at Fort Sumter, that started the war, which goes into our question today. And here's our big question. If you want to write it down on the top, because this is going to guide everything you do today. I form compelling questions using the standards that's historically significant. And if it's historically significant, my kids have to understand the connection between something that either happened before or a chain of events that have happened. So I want to make sure that they understand that the historical significance becomes because there was something that changed as a result of that event. So I want the compelling question to be something that is not only something specific to that event, or that person, if we're talking about a person, but also I want them to understand that it's transferable, that compelling question is transferable to another person, or it's another, because they'll learn basic American history while they're with me in 4th grade. However, when they continue on, they'll be learning world history. And I would hope that the compelling questions that they are asking, or that they're being asked and they're responding to in 4th grade, that they're going to be asked that same question, and they're going to respond to those same questions when they're in 8th grade and when they're in 9th grade, and even when they're 28 years old and 58 years old. That's my goal. My question to you, our compelling question of the day was the Battle of Fort Sumter the start, and I'm making start capital letters, of the Civil War? Was the Battle of Fort Sumter the start of the Civil War? Give that some thought. So have we done any discussions about Fort Sumter? So that means that we need to do some investigating. As historians, we need to investigate what actually happened at Fort Sumter, and maybe what else? During it, and maybe a little bit before it too, right? My kids came into my classroom naturally curious. And I read a great quote this past summer in a book called The Innovator's Mindset by George Couros. And in it he said, if students leave our classroom less curious than when we got there, we have failed them. I don't want to fail my students. So I want to encourage that curiosity. I want to nurture it. I want to treat it just as like it's as precious as anything, any other tool I have in my classroom, because that is what's going to propel them forward in their lives as learners. Because really our job as educators is to create lifelong learners, to nurture lifelong learners. And if I teach them how to learn, then I've done my job, because they can find the content information any way. In this day and age, there is no bit of information that they are not privy to, that they can't access. But I want to show them how to access valid and reliable information, and how to use that to make really smart decisions as citizens of our country. Okay, but we're going to use our resources that we have at each table. We've got a set of resources, and we want to be a little bit more specific. You came up with brilliant questions yesterday that are very general to the different types of tools we use. But now what we want to do is we want to ask ourselves some specific questions that go with, was the Battle of Fort Sumter the start of the Civil War? So you've got in there one small event, one big event, the Battle of Fort Sumter, and then you've got a huge event, the big event, which is the Civil War, and then you've got a very important word in there, start. The start. Was it the beginning of it? So what I want you to be thinking about is, look, and you could use your notes from yesterday, what are some of the specific questions we want to ask that's going to guide our inquiry today? So think back to newspaper clippings and headlines. What's a specific question you would ask of a newspaper clipping or a headline? Yes, ma'am.
What are specific details of the event?
All right, so I'm gonna stop you right there. So instead of looking on here and saying, I'm going to say a question right off this page, these are general questions. That means they're big, broad. You can use them with just about any event. We want to concentrate specifically on the Battle of Fort Sumter. So thinking specifically about Fort Sumter and connecting it with the Civil War. So how are we going to do that? So think about the questions you would want to ask about Fort Sumter. Now, thinking about newspaper clippings. Remember, Caitlin said that is it's at the right there moment. It's happening right then. It's coming from their perspective. What kind of questions could you ask that would help you understand to come up with the answer to this question using news? Yes, Zion.
What is going on at this exact time during Fort Sumter?
Okay, what is going on at this exact time during the... Okay, so that's a great question. So I'm going to write it down on our big sticky note, and we're going to stick it on here, and this is what you're going to use to guide your instruction. So repeat that one more time.
What is going on at this exact time during the Battle of Fort Sumter?
Going on at this time, and I'm going to call it the Battle of Fort, I'm going to question. Okay, any others? I'm going to change up my marker. Yes?
Is this really what happened?
Okay, can you make it more specific too?
Is this really what happened at the Battle of Fort Sumter?
So you're asking that of the,
Perspective.
but you're asking that of the
Newspaper.
newspaper. So you're saying, is that really what happened? Okay, so you're asking, so you say, is this really what happened? Okay, those are good questions. So we're going to put these up here because this is going to help guide your instruction. Who's got the newspaper clippings station? Okay, so when you get there, these are some of these are two questions that could help guide your instruction. Your instruction that could help guide your learning or help guide your questions and your investigation. So I'm going to put this up here so you'll refer to that. All right. Are you stuck to just those questions? No. Can you ask other questions? Yes. You'll probably have lots of questions that pop up. All right, so the other questions that y'all came up with that are specific to Fort Sumter and the start of this Civil War is, for maps, you said, where is Fort Sumter? And then you said, how did this map affect the decisions the soldiers made? Excellent questions. The written documents questions that y'all came up with. Was this document about Fort Sumter supposed to be public? And the follow-up question you had was, if so, why? And then finally, our images crew came up with these two fantastic questions. Was the Battle of Fort Sumter worth remembering? And then what is the perspective of the person responsible for the picture? Those are excellent questions that are going to guide us along as we go. All right, so what we're going to do now is you already are at your first station. Your first station is written documents if you're here, maps if you're here, newspapers if you're here, and images if you're here. So I'm going to give you exactly 10 minutes at each station to really get into the resources that are in here. And what I'd like for you to do first is open up your notebook, and you're going to make the chart we always make, which is a 3-column chart. Go ahead and make your 3-column chart. You're going to turn it sideways like this. Make your 3-column chart real quick. I'll do yours real quick as a demonstration. 3-column chart. And this first chart, this first column is going to be what I see. So we're going to put a big S because this is what you see. The middle one is going to be what does it mean? What does it mean? And the last one is why does it matter? So you can write the word matter out there. So S, as you recall, is what you see. M is what it means. And the last one is why does it matter? So you're going to do this 4 times. So as you go to each station, you're going to create a new one. Don't go ahead and pre-do them. I want you to spend your time really getting into the resources that you have available to you. So this is where you can document your thoughts and the things you're seeing, but let those questions guide you. Also, the questions that are going to come up as you're looking at these images, those should, or these documents or these resources, these are going to guide you. Does everybody understand? Any questions? Oh, you're going to have plenty of them in just a minute. Okay? Y'all have got good questions. Okay, all right. So I'm putting 10 minutes on the clock, and you're going to start with the station you're at right now. Go.
Okay. I think yours are both have like kind of like similar things because they're both kind of like mine is basically attacked at both sides. Is this also for something? This is me. They're all for something. They're all the outside. Like how many are affected? Because whoever this one, he sees it like show the battle. You know. But why does this matter? How many people are at the battle? I see, Chase, yours shows some types of attacking.
All right, so you've gathered a lot of information using the resources that you have at your table. So kind of make sure you kind of scoot those resources to the middle. And then what we're going to do is we're going to rotate each team to the next station, which you're going to go clockwise. That means you're going to go this way. So this team's going to go here. So go ahead. You've got 10 seconds to get where you need to get. Make haste. All right. Okay, once you get started, now you're ready. Once you get settled, you're ready to start your new station. You've already got the gist of what you're going to do. If you need to glance at our chart that we made earlier to get some ideas of questions to guide your investigation, please feel free to go up there and look. So go ahead now, but shift your brain into thinking this is a different kind of resource to you. So go ahead and jump into them. So our time starts now. I like to design my lessons with a whole group in mind first, just kind of almost like a town meeting, come together and have a general understanding of what we're to do and what our task is. And also another big part of that is connecting with previous learning so that they can understand what they've done before connects with what we're doing now. And hopefully they'll see the connection between everything we do and they'll go forward with that kind of thinking in mind. So then we take what we're doing today as a whole group, explain to them what their compelling question is, and then explain to them what they're going to be doing to answer that compelling question and what kind of resources they're going to use, and going back to the general questions they generated before, and now they're going to use it today to be able to answer that compelling question.
It's like this one person standing here, and then there's rocks and stuff. It looks like something just got damaged where... Oh, it looks like that person's holding like a baby.
This means people can come from water.
So that means people have really easy access to water.
Okay, so y'all have the newspaper clippings.
Yeah. Went from boat. And this means people can attack Fort Sumter easily because they can come from water. And if they have like submarines, they can dive under, attack, go back under.
That's a great question. Jot that down. Did they have submarines back then?
If they did.
Great question.
Me and Chase kind of have similar pictures because we both have Fort Sumter stuff about Fort Sumter, and that one is preparation.
Wait, I need to read mine.
Sumter.
And
That's like what's happening right there.
We see a lot of destruction in these pictures, so they're all related by destruction.
that one,
Like they're destroying everything in wars or battles.
see cannon right here.
And then we were thinking, for this one, we see like maybe someone carrying another person.
All right, so you've done a lot of investigating today. So what I'd like for you to do real quick is for 1 minute, have a discussion at your table about what have you gathered as far as evidence to support whether you believe, yes, was the Battle of Fort Sumter the start of the Civil War, or no, it was not. So have a real quick 1 minute talk about that at your table.
Because it had so much destruction and like explosion thing with it.
And war. It was a big, huge battle or war.
Bombing and other stuff, and like making articles and they got newspapers and stuff.
The people who were in charge of Fort Sumter.
Oh, my little historians, y'all are thinking so well. I'm loving it. Y'all are such good thinkers. Y'all are doing the real work of historians. I love it. So here's what we've got to do right now. So we're going to do our thrash out, our mini thrash out real quick. Okay, you ready? Okay, I know, yes. Okay, so here's what you're going to do. And you got to listen to everything first before you go. All right. If you believe yes, the Battle of Fort Sumter started the Civil War. I'm going to ask you in a moment to stand right in this section right here, okay? If you say, nah, it didn't start then, I'm going to ask you to stand right here. If you are still unsure, you don't know yes or no, I'm going to ask you to stand in the middle. But actually, I'm going to ask you to kind of kneel down a little bit in the middle. Cool? Okay, so on the count of 1, go. 1. Right here, this is yes, and this is no. This is yes right here in this spot. This is yes right here in this spot. This is yes in this spot, right where I'm pointing. This is yes, and this is no. Okay, there we go. All right, so we have absolutely no no's. Nobody believes that it wasn't the start. You all believe, yes, it was the start. You're still unsure. So here's what I need y'all to do. In little mini groups, I want y'all to pick one. Well, actually, I want you to pick one person in your group. Just one person in your group who's going to represent you and is going to state the reason why, yes, we believe it, because this is going to either convince you yes or no. They're going to persuade you they're going to persuade you to yes. Okay, so 1 minute, get it worked out. Okay, so my question to you is, what information were you missing? What information do you need that would help you?
I could have used like actual quotes about it.
Okay, so quotes would have been a great resource to use. Okay.
You know exactly what you're saying.
Ah, so get different perspectives from different people. Okay, yes.
On the maps it said 1861, so I think the information I needed was when did the Civil War start?
Okay, so you needed the exact date that the Civil War. Well, okay, all right, yes.
I'm really needing to know more information about like the whole thing, like what caused Fort Sumter and stuff.
In other words, why is Fort Sumter even brought into this as why was it brought up? Okay, so those are some good questions. All right, boys and girls, do you have your representative?
Yes.
Okay. Who is it? Oh, okay. All right, Davis, come over here. All right, so Davis is out to explain to you guys who are in no man's land, otherwise we don't know yet. He's going to explain to you why they believe, yes, Fort Sumter was the start of the Civil War. Shoot.
Our group went to maps and we saw that Fort Sumter was surrounded by water. And then whenever we got over to the newspaper clips and articles, we saw that one of the articles said that rebellion, shots fired at Fort Sumter. And so once we got over to the images, we saw cannon fire being shot at this huge fort, which was surrounded by water. And over here, Fort Sumter was surrounded by water, so we thought that the shots fired over here were the cannon fire that was shooting at like Fort Sumter. And another picture showed that it was a Capitol and it said Jefferson Davis's inauguration, and in Montgomery, Alabama. So inauguration is like when they're like taking it into office. And so like Jefferson Davis, I think he had something to do with the cannon fire because maybe he was thinking about that all this time, but he thought maybe since he wasn't in office and he didn't have like power, like real power, he thought maybe no one would follow him or agree with him. And once he got into office, he thought since like he had a lot of power, people would be like, oh, he's strong, so I think we should follow him. And he had kind of had like the same ideas as us, so I think that was.
Okay, so now it's your time to make a decision. Do you agree with them, yes? Or do you want to, you're still not sure? So at the count of 1, you're going to get up and move. 1. Okay, you're saying no. Okay, so we've got a no. And we've got another no. All right, and we still have some undecided. And based on my conversation with you, it's because you just don't have enough information yet. And maybe a little bit more time with the resources we had will give you a little bit more clearer picture. Okay, great. I need all of you back to your desk, please. Open up to a clean sheet of paper in your notebook. Was the Battle of Fort Sumter the start of the Civil War. And then, of course, give evidence to support your idea, to support that response. And if you were not decided yet, then I need you to also say, but I need some more information. Okay, so I'm going to give you exactly 2 minutes to do that. Go. So boys and girls, look this way. Pencils down. Okay, so as you can tell, we've been talking a lot before about the abolition movement and how the abolition movement started because people were against slavery. And so the big issue during this time period is the issue of slavery, and it's coming to a head. No more sweeping it under the rug, no more ignoring it. Now it's coming like full head, and also states' rights and all the things that go with people wanting power and who's going to be in control. So as we move forward in this unit, I want you to be thinking, what does this matter to us now? This lesson's core is conflict and how conflict creates change. And is all conflict bad, and is all conflict instant? And that's the heart of this lesson. Where we're going to go next with this into the unit is looking at how does that relate to where we are today. And you can't avoid, you can't walk out of the door without encountering conflict or some news of conflict. So I want to be able to get them to develop the thinking of how do we reckon conflict in this world and how it influences change, and how can we promote change, but change in a positive way, and take the conflict, we sometimes use the word conflict in a very negative way. It just means that there is an issue and there are two sides to the issue, and there's a disagreement. So we will talk further about how do you take a conflict, how do you take an issue where there's more than one side to it, and how do you come peaceably together to come up with a solution. So our next lesson is going to be about peace starts with me. And it was inspired by a lesson that was done on teaching tolerance, and then how do we incorporate that into our everyday lives. And hopefully, as good citizens, they'll be able to be that part of the solution, and because it starts with them. I'm in my sociology class as a sophomore in college, and I had not really settled on what I wanted to do as a grown-up. So my sociology professor listed 10 things that were problems with America at the time, and one of them was there are a lack of competent teachers, and the thought jumped in my head, I could be a competent teacher. And I started my training soon after, and went through training to become a teacher and became a teacher. And I was always, I can be a competent teacher, and I kept on going with that. But then I realized the more I interacted with my students, my kids, because they became my kids, I realized that my job was so much more important than just to be competent. My job was to teach them, and to teach them with excellence. So I shifted from, I'm okay with being competent, to I have to be excellent because it's about them. It's not about me. My job is to create lifelong learners and critical thinkers and good citizens who can contribute productively. And we say that a lot as teachers. We say those words, but what does it really mean? I want the power of inquiry that's what I'm doing. I'm training them precisely how to not just read something and accept it for what it is. I want them to go from compliance to participation. I want them to be empowered. And the only way I can empower them truly is to give them the tools with which they can go into this world and think wisely and do good things.